Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Oh, thank you. I get our color and catchers.
No, that was.
No. That was when she was gone. I still had it. So I handed it back. So no, yeah, there was no test. And she did very well on it, even though I said it.
Oh.
Huh?
I was just like, oh, we'll see what happens.
I don't, last week.
Yeah, anything around 90 is good on one of my tests.
Sorry. Okay. Where did you put it?
Okay. What's in the news? Anything in the news?
Like a ton of people died today.
Yeah, there was a bombing in Russia. Is that what the one you're talking about?
There was like a bombing, a police officer was shot in Texas. What was the other thing? There was like a basement boiler exploded or something. 3 people died.
I didn't hear about that one. So there's I guess a bombing in, train in Moscow. They're already calling it terrorism. They found a second bomb. The report is they were able to defuse it. They actually potentially have a picture of the suspect, so we shall see. I'm wondering at what point does the world realize that it's at war, or I shouldn't say it's at war, that radical Islam is at war with the rest of the world, including the Russians, the French, the Americans, the British, and all of these civilized Western civilization countries. So we need to remember that. Let's see. Anything else in the news? Oh, there's a defector that came out that says Kim will use nukes, which we're actually going to get into. The Korean War was this week, and you're reading, if I'm right? Was it not? I don't remember.
No, I think it was a week. Like last weekend.
Oh, okay. So yes, we will get into the Korean War. We're going to finish up World War II. We're going to get into the Korean War. The Korean War is what we would call the first war that we tied. During the 1900s, there was a lot of people before the war in, before our first Desert Storm operative against Saddam Hussein, many people were saying that we had 2 wins, which is World War I, World War II. 1 tie, which was Korea, and 1 loss, which was Vietnam. So it was a big boost for our military when we ended up winning in the Desert Storm. In fact, General Schwarzkopf said this will not be another Vietnam, even though all of the media basically said that this will be another Vietnam when we went to war against Saddam Hussein, or they compared it more to the Afghanistan war that the Russians had during when they were actually still the Soviet Union in the 1980s. But that did not occur, which is, of course, a good thing. Let's see, anything else in the news? Last week, Trump wrote an executive order that basically wiped out all of Obama's environmental policies with one fell swoop of the pen. He's basically trying to reinvigorate the coal industry, and China, of course, is not happy about it. They do not. They are claiming that they're going to be one of the ones that's going to be shouldering the burden of keeping the climate change, which is a laugh, because if you go to China, a friend of mine was a missionary there in China. If you go to China, they do big of those lighted billboards of the sunrise and sunsets. Why? Because there's so much pollution, so much smog, they can't see the sun very well. So they don't get a sunrise and they don't get a sunset. It's like cloudy all the time. So that's why they actually put the sunrise, sunset on these big giant bulletin boards. She said it was very, very depressing many times, especially as an American going over there to China. She loved the opportunity to go to China, but it was really tough to live there. They were stationed there for over a year, to be there that entire year. When she come back, it was like, even being in Ohio, which we get like 60 days of sun a year, she was like, oh, sunshine. Actually being able to see a sunrise, sunset. So China is really bad. The reason why the Chinese like the environmental is because it puts a burden on our economy, which then makes us not as competitive with the Chinese. You lift a lot of these burdens off of our industry, and you'll end up with a much stronger U.S. economy, especially when it comes to cheap energy. The reason why the U.S. has always been where it's been is because of cheap energy. And not only cheap, but reliable too. As that energy becomes more and more expensive, then we have more and more problems. Do you guys remember this problem? You guys probably don't remember this. Back when the last Bush was president, in order to conserve energy, because the amount of energy we were using was going up, and the amount of energy we were producing was actually going down because we're shutting down factories, even under Bush, that these power plants, that what we had to do was pass laws that basically outlawed incandescent lights. That's why it's very hard to find an incandescent light today. It's because those were outlawed by George W. Bush, which of course I have to say government overreach. Well, we find out that the compact CFL, those little curly cube ones that are like horrible and I can't stand, they are actually mainly produced in China, not here in the United States, whereas a lot of our incandescent bulbs are actually made here in the United States. So it actually, again, hurt American manufacturing to some degree. I'm trying to think if was anything else there. Oh, they're looking at tax cuts. Trump will stop North Korea, which again kind of fits with this idea of us, what we're going to talk about today with North Korea. The Supreme Court nominee. Anybody hear anything about the Supreme Court nominee? Yes.
Isn't like the Senate voting on it right now, and
The committee is.
Fox News says that the Democrats, they could filibuster it, so.
Right. So, yeah, the Democrats are claiming that the Republicans do not have the 60 votes to bring the debate to the floor for a vote. Now, remember, in the Senate, you have the idea of being able to filibuster. Well, filibuster is that you have to have, in order to vote on something, you have to have 60 votes, which is called the cloture vote, before you can do the real vote. Well, you can get a number of people who don't want to vote against something publicly, will vote against the closure so it doesn't come to the Senate floor for the final vote. So then they can just say, well, yeah, I supported that. Well, then why didn't you vote for the end of the closure of the debate? Well, man, but I was for it. It's where you get terms like John Kerry, Senator John Kerry, when they were doing, when he was running for office against George W. Bush, he on one of the bills that came before him, he said, well, I voted for it before I voted against it. Basically, he was meaning he voted on the closure bill so that it would go to the floor for debate and be voted on. He voted for that, but then voted against the bill. So that's where they come up with some of these things that they say, well, I voted for it before I voted against it. you know, they like to play, politicians like to play both sides of the coin. So if the Republicans have threatened with Neil Gorsuch, which there is no real red flags with this guy. My concern is he going to be constitutional enough, or is he going to be like some of the Republican nominees that weren't as conservative as what we would have liked? And so therefore, may not be a good thing. But all the Republicans have threatened, if they vote against, if they don't vote for cloture, then the Republicans are going to do what they call the nuclear option. The Senate can change its rules and make it so that any of these people do not require the 60 votes to close the debate and just make it a straight up and down vote. Then they would have enough votes. So we'll see what happens. A lot of people are kind of surprised because this guy is replacing Judge Scalia, who was very, very strong conservative constitutionalist, and they're thinking this guy is in the same kind of mold as what Scalia was. So this would be a great one for everybody to just go, for balance of the court, replacing Scalia, yes, we put Gorsuch in and we just deal with it. And then because Ruth Bader Ginsburg is very sick, and at some point they're thinking either she may die or she may have to retire, which means that would be a better one for the Democrats to fight on, because of the fact that they can say, well, for balance of the court, they should put somebody in the same mold as Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But by doing this fight now, the Republicans are actually the one having the momentum to really say, do the nuclear option, make it a straight up and down vote, and not give the Democrats the chance to fight. So we'll see what happens going forward. But the majority leader of the Senate has vowed that they will do this on, they will actually have him confirmed by Friday. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so want to continue on with what we were talking about last week and finish up. We talked about the invasion of D-Day and some of the things that happened in D-Day and what they had to fight through. We also looked briefly at the Battle of the Bulge, and I mentioned there's Bastogne. Here's the lines of where the Germans were able to push out from. And you can see Bastogne is there. That's where the 101st was surrounded on all sides. Bastogne is a major, major city. There's like 7 roads, main roads that pass through Bastogne, and holding Bastogne kept the Germans from being able to move all their tanks up quickly through the area. And one of the reasons why we were able to win in the battle. And of course, there's a huge, huge disagreement. The Third Army that was under the command of Patton, that's a picture of Patton there, comes in and liberates Bastogne. So the Third Army claims that they rescued the 101st, and the 101st is like, no, they didn't. We were never rescued. In fact, in one of the interviews afterwards that they talked, that I was watching, that, yeah, that we were, even, this was like 4 or 5 years ago, they were even stopped claiming today, we were never rescued, we're paratroopers, we're supposed to be surrounded. We're paratroop behind enemy lines. So this is normal for us. We weren't liberated, but he also said, gave kudos to Patton, what he did in his push, because Patton was way, way down south, turned it, he was getting ready to cross into Germany, turned his army 90 degrees and hightailed it up to Bastogne and pushed through the German lines. And the 101st guy gave Patton credit for that. But again, this is it's still in contention today. Of course, more and more the World War II generation is dying off, so we have less and less of them available. So for some of you, it'd probably be your great grandparents. Both my grandfathers fought in World War II. Unfortunately for me, both of them have died. So by the time I started teaching and getting more and more fascinated with World War II, they weren't alive to be able to talk to about it. But I don't know if you can ask family members about what your family did.
My grandpa, he died like a couple years ago, right before I was in 7th grade. I don't know how long that was, like 4 years ago, I don't know. But anyways, and I remember for one of my classes, like we started in like 6th grade or something, like talking about World War II, and we had to, if we had any family members that our teachers wanted us to ask them about it. And so my grandpa, he was telling me and my brothers a story about, and this could be a little wrong because like he was like dying, so I mean his mind might not have been completely right. But he was saying how he was supposed to be in a plane. Okay, so he was in a plane, okay, and he was in a crate. And in the crate was a Jeep. And he was in the Jeep. Okay, this makes absolutely no sense if you don't believe it. Okay, so, and then they were gonna push the crate out of the plane, and then when the plane landed, the people in the Jeep, there was people with him, were supposed to like drive past the enemy lines or whatever. And so my grandpa, he was telling me the story about how the people that were with him, like they were just sitting in this crate and like telling all these jokes when they were in there like, before they got pushed off out of the plane. And then he was like, yeah, and then we got pushed off and you know, it landed weird, and so my grandpa got injured or something and had to get discharged. But it was just funny because he was like, we're just sitting in this Jeep, you know, waiting to get pushed out of this plane, acting like it was nothing. I was like, you're so cool.
That wouldn't surprise me, actually. It really wouldn't. I mean, I could see all the crazy things that the military did back during World War II and all the new things that they were coming out with.
Yeah.
Parachuting Jeeps in and stuff like that. So it really wouldn't be surprising. Okay, so after, of course, we had war in Europe, but we also had war in the Pacific because of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, where we started. And you can see that we actually had, so here's the red line is the extent of Japanese influence. And you can see here, this is all that. Right here is Korea, which we will get into today, not far from Japan. The Koreans to this day still hate, especially the North Koreans, hate the Japanese. In fact, they have fired test ballistic missiles towards Japan. So the threat always with Korea is they claim to have nuclear weapons, is that they will actually nuke someplace in Japan, like Tokyo or something. So the Japanese have a... They're in Tokyo right now? Well, hopefully one doesn't start now. I doubt it. But you can see the extent of where the Japanese influence was. The Battle of Midway, of course, that was one of the ones where we talked about really kind of the turning point for America in the war, first major victory for us. And then, of course, we end up pushing into these areas. You got Iwo Jima, Okinawa, you can see where these are. And Okinawa and these islands give us the ability now to bomb Japan. And also Okinawa was this strategic area of what we were going to use to invade Japan. They were the thought was, if we were to invade Japan, it would cost us not in deaths, but we'd have to use 1 million troops. Yeah, that's how many people they thought it would take to invade Japan. At the same time going on, you have the thief in the camp, or what they call the Yalta and the deal made. Really what is fascinating about the whole Yalta conference is actually the isolation of Great Britain. Really a lot of what was going on. FDR was kind of pushing Churchill and Great Britain off to the side and working more and more heavily with the Soviet Union. The reason being is they wanted, you can see here, here's the Soviet Union. They wanted the Soviet Union involved in this possible invasion of Japan that might happen. And so we were one-siding with that. But also the other thing, and we will learn about this a little bit more in later, is we have a guy by the name of Alger Hiss, who's involved from the State Department, who is involved in the negotiations. So it's a high-level diplomat on the side of the United States. He goes there with FDR. Well, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but Alger Hiss, of course, was convicted of being a spy. Mainly, actually not convicted of being a spy, but actually convicted of perjury. And to this day, his family still claims that he was innocent, that he was actually wrongfully persecuted. So rather though than invading Japan, we of course dropped the 2 bombs. They were of course nicknamed Fat Man and Little Boy. Of course you can tell based on the size. So before the attack in Japan, though, of course, we end up beating Germany. We defeat Germany. We actually stopped short of going into Berlin, and we let the Russians invade Berlin. The Russians were absolutely brutal to the German people. In fact, they were so brutal to the women and children of the German people that many of, if the women and children were caught behind enemy lines, there are stories of the women killing their baby, killing their children, and killing themselves because of what the Russian soldiers were doing, especially to the women, the German women. The atrocities put on by the Russians and the Soviets was just astounding. Now, that's because a lot of the atrocities the Germans had done to the Russians. And so this was more of a payback. So there were actually troops. There was, in fact, what Hitler, before he killed himself, actually commanded many of his officers to secure the city, to repel the attack. We can win this battle. We can do all this. Hitler, to the end, thought he could win the war. The generals finally decided to disobey orders, and the main general in charge actually came up with a plan of trying to evacuate the people out of Berlin and get them across to the Allied side where they could surrender to the Allies, the U.S. and the Great Britain soldiers, because they knew the Americans were not doing the same things. So they, this German general spends a lot of time and a lot of sacrifice to rescue a lot of the civilians out of Berlin. Then, of course, we talked about the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which leads to the final surrender of Japan. There's a lot of debate whether we should have dropped those bombs on those 2 cities and done what we did. And there's a number of people who think that we should pay reparations to Japan. I think we've given them enough money over the years and economic growth and stuff like that. So I don't think we need to pay reparations. So you have especially right now, there's a lot of push for the fact that what we did in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was absolutely unwarranted and wrong. Well, again, we talk about the atrocities of the Russians and the Germans. The Japanese were just as bad. And in fact, in many cases, the Japanese, what they did to the Chinese and the Filipinos and to Americans and to the British were absolutely brutal. In fact, 2 generals had a contest as to who could kill more people with their sword. And these weren't just people in battle, these were prisoners or civilians, and they would take the time to practice chopping people's heads off. So we're talking about that the Japanese were not nice during this time frame. They're not the Japanese we know today. And so therefore, dropping the bomb on them, I see, for me, it was a big deal because we could see what the damage is done, but it's also, when it comes to based on what Japan had done to the Pacific and what they ended up happening to them, I think their sins are far greater. Post-war, Europe, yes.
You know, I watched a documentary a couple years ago on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or one of them. Some of the stories, like, they're really sad. There was a woman who, she had her 2 little girls, and her husband, they were getting ready to start their day. And then the bomb exploded. One of her daughters was killed in the explosion. The other, she had to listen to her scream as she burned to death.
Mm-hmm. Well, we did drop pamphlets in there, letting them know that the bomb was coming.
So, you mean beforehand we dropped?
Mm-hmm. We dropped leaflets in both cities, letting them know what we were going to do, but the people refused to leave.
Hmm.
So, yeah, but I have to say the screams of the mothers who had their children killed by the sword in front of them by the Japanese officers, and I really have no sympathy, and to some degree, for the Japanese people at the time, because of, again, what the atrocities that their own troops were doing to other surrendered civilians. So, unfortunately, when you have war is not some neat little thing where there's an open battlefield and everybody fights. A war is actually in occupied cities, and innocent people die because of that. And it's a sad thing, and it's something that's why we should never take war too lightly, why we should never invade a country or do anything like that without really thinking something through. So I would not say I am a hawk, but I lean more towards a hawk. A hawk is somebody who wants to go to war and wants to blow up the enemy and stuff. But I am very much somebody that's, well, if you're gonna poke the bear needs to use all of its power to win the war. Because I mean, think about the families. I mean, I say we're at war right now with radical Islam. I'm not saying we're at war with Islam. We're at war with radical Islam. Look at what happened with the bombing at the Boston Marathon, which, and here's 2 guys who put down pressure cooker bombs that are loaded with BBs and other things that basically designed to shred people into pieces. And what they did is horrific compared to, the one guy died, I think, was killed by the police officers when he was captured. The other one, I don't think he's been on trial yet. I don't remember. So, yeah, again, we shouldn't take war lightly. It's something that sometimes is necessary, and we have to do it. After the war, of course, with the signing in Yalta, you have the Soviet Union extends its influence all the way in here into the Mediterranean. So you've got all this all the way down here near Turkey. You got Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, East Germany. Of course, none of you guys remember this. None of you were born because the wall came down in the early 90s. Many of these countries became free democratic states like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary. Most of these countries are, of course, no longer communistic. Russia, we could even say Russia is really not communistic. It still has some communist leanings, but the communists are still in power in Russia, and that's one of the problems why we run into issues. Putin is a former KGB guy, who there's actually pictures of him in the 1980s. Ronald Reagan's in the picture, and there in the background is Putin as a KGB agent. So, this guy's been around for a long time, even before the Soviet Union fell. You also, during this time, you have the division of Germany, which you can see here. East Germany kind of fits what you got right there. And then you end up with West Germany. So, I'll send you guys this poem. We don't have really time for that one, but I do like this one. So this guy was returning to France. Robert Whitley, an elderly gentleman of 83, arrived in Paris by plane. At French customs, he took a few minutes to locate his passport in his carry-on. "You have been to France before, monsieur?" the customs officer asked sarcastically. Mr. Whitting admitted that he had been to France previously. "Then you should know enough to have your passport ready." The American said, "The last time I was here, I didn't have to show it." "Impossible. Americans always have to show their passports on arrival in France." The American senior gave the Frenchman a long, hard look. Then he quietly explained, "Well, when I came ashore at Omaha Beach on D-Day in 1944 to help liberate this country, I couldn't find a single Frenchman to show the passport to." So I always like that story.
Oh.
Kind of a little bit of a slam on the French. Oh, I feel so bad for them too. No, not really. Let's see. So on to chapter 23. We're doing good. Again, going on with the post-war era. 45 to 63, the Cold War starts. Out of that, of course, you have the founding of the United Nations. The interesting design with the United Nations. There are a couple of people I have read that doesn't believe we should be part of the United Nations. The United Nations is a gathering of dictators and despots, and it should be removed, kicked out of the United States. And what we should form is the United Nations of democracies, or United Democracies, which requires members to be meet certain criteria in order to be part of. After World War II, of course, we quickly find, as Patton wanted to go in and knock the Russians out. Of course, if you want to read an interesting story, read The Death of Patton. There's a book by Bill O'Reilly called Killing Patton. Bill O'Reilly likes to kill all these people. He did Killing Lincoln, Killing Patton, Killing Jesus, Killing Kennedy, which I haven't read that one yet, but I heard it's really good. But Killing Patton, there's many believe that Killing Patton was actually a conspiracy put on by our own, what we would look at today as the precursor to our CIA. The other one is if it might even be attributed to the Russians, the Soviet Union killing Patton. Again, Patton was very outspoken, and so therefore a lot of people didn't like him because of that. But he foresaw the need of containing communism, and that the Russians were no better than Germany, and that we would be fighting them at some point in the end. And he was partly right. We haven't really had a true battle, us against the Russians and the Germans, but we have had what we would call these skirmishes, proxy wars. A proxy war is you get two other countries to fight, and then the two big boys are actually supplying each of these countries with ammo and stuff like that, so that they can then fight and see what's going on. That the Iran-Iraq war was a proxy war. Vietnam was kind of our war, but the Russians and the Chinese were supplying arms to the Vietnamese. as was the same within Korea. The Chinese were involved, the Russians were helping their side. Of course, we were supplying, when the Russians were in Afghanistan, we were supplying the Afghan people with their arms that they needed. There's a story that even back during the second Gulf War under George W. Bush, when we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, that in Iraq, Saddam Hussein had Russian advisors there on the ground, and the rumor is that George W. Bush called up Russia and said, listen, either you pull these guys out or we kill them. Because we're not going to have your people there helping them out. But one of the things that the Russians were doing was they were basically they're testing some of their defensive abilities against our offensive abilities. So they were using some of their technology to see how well they could counter our technology. So you have, of course, the declaring of the Cold War, Eastern Europe, the Iron Curtain, which you remember you saw the Russians build this buffer between them and Germany. The Russians are tired of being invaded. They don't like England. They don't like France. They don't like Germany. So, of course, we divide up Germany. And then the Russians take Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and they create what they call the Iron Curtain, basically to protect them from anybody invading. And Truman, of course, comes up with his plan of containment, which we would call really the Truman Doctrine. It must be the policy of the United States to support free people who are resisting attempted subjugation, by armed minorities or by outside pressures. So a lot of this communist uprising was a lot of the minority people in a certain country. It wasn't the majority. Communism has never been something really put on by the majority. It's been a very vocal and violent minority that usually leads the communists. And what do? They put themselves in power, because it's really not about liberating the people. It's about putting themselves in power and kicking the other people out. Western Europe, you have Marshall develops what we call the Marshall Plan, which is economic aid to Western European countries. This is a way of countermanding the communist influence coming in. If there's groups that have economic growth, if these countries have economic growth, then they're going to be less likely to want to go to communism. So Marshall came up with this idea of us investing in these countries to help them rebuild, and then they'd be less likely to become communistic. And his plan was brilliant. Of course, his plan, had we done that after World War I, we probably would not have had World War II, because we would have helped rebuild Germany, and we would have helped rebuild a lot of those areas. Unfortunately, we didn't listen. We also have the formation of NATO, which is, you probably hear that phrase a lot. It's really the military aspect. If one country that's a member of NATO is attacked by another country, then NATO will respond, meaning basically us will respond to protect that country. And the Warsaw Pact as well. The Cold War, the Berlin Airlift. If you get a chance, go to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. There is a neat little display for the Berlin Airlift down there and some of the pictures and stuff. So 31 Americans lost their lives bringing food to West Berlin. And West Berlin is right in the middle of East Germany. It's completely surrounded. So what happened was the Russians, the Soviet Union, did not like what we were doing with some of the things in uniting West Germany. Now, if you remember, West Germany was supposed to be broken up into a British territory, an American territory, a French territory, and the Netherlands territory. Well, the British and the United States got together and decided that we're going to unite these together and form what's known as West Germany. And so we formed this West Germany. Well, in reaction to that, the Russians decide, well, they're trying to create a fully united Germany. We're going to cut them off from West Berlin. So basically, this is the East Berlin, which is Soviet sector, and then we have all of this, the French, British, and the American sector. So what they did is they blockaded all of the railroad and transportation in and out of West Berlin. So they couldn't get supplies. So we ended up flying aircraft in there, basically daring the Russians to shoot us down. They were basically daring us to shoot them, and we moved our B-52 bombers into Great Britain. And these were not just normal B-52s, these were B-52s with nuclear bombs in them. So we were ready for the fact that if the Russians decided to start aggression in Berlin, we were gonna drop another nuke, if need be. Again, as we continue through, you got the Korean War. Here, this gives you kind of an idea of what happened. We have Mao Zedong, of course, in China, the Korean War. North Korea, from the 38th parallel, invades South Korea. This was in June. By September, they had control of most of the country. By November, we had pushed back and almost kicked them completely out of the country, taken control entirely. Well, of course, by 1953, the Chinese, which is here, China gets involved, comes across the river, they add their troops. The problem with the Korean War, the reason why we did not win the war is because politicians finally start deciding what's going to happen in wars and deciding how we can fight them. No, you can't blow up this bridge. Well, if we can't blow up this bridge, then they can resupply themselves. Well, that's okay. We can't do that, though. I mean, so General MacArthur was so angry about some of this stuff that he started fighting a PR war against Truman. And what happens to MacArthur? I guess you probably, I don't remember if it was in the book or not.
Didn't he become like a pastor of a mega church by the time?
No, MacArthur is fired by Truman. He is removed as commander of the military in the Pacific. And so they put somebody in who, of course, will listen. And of course, we fought that war for 3 years. There's a neat monument to the Korean War in Washington, D.C. If you get a chance to ever go to Washington, D.C., go to the Korean War Monument, go to the World War II Monument, go to the Vietnam Monument. Those are three really, really cool. Of course, all of them are outdoors. Here's an interesting picture. So this is South Korea. This is North Korea. That's a picture at night. Who do you think is a little more successful? I don't see much lights on in North Korea because that's what communism does. This picture was actually taken in 2012. So you can see that the economic growth in North Korea is really not that high. But yet they tout that they're the greatest country ever. But yeah, that's what South Korea looks like.
They only think that they're the greatest country ever because the dictator thinks that, and he can make everybody else think that.
The dictator knows better. The dictator just cuts off any communications from the outside. What we should do is we should just fly planes over and drop leaflets. Or maybe we should drop Apple iPods loaded with music and videos and stuff like that are done in Korean so that the people could see what they're missing. Just an idea. Might win that war real quick.
So still don't think that they would listen because they'd be too afraid of the dictators.
Oh, yeah, they are. I mean, the dictator, he is so bad, he killed his uncle by throwing him in a cage with hungry dogs, and they tore him apart.
That is cruel.
Cruel to the uncle or to the dogs? I don't know.
I don't know.
Just the Cold War, commentating communism. One of the things that, you know, Eisenhower, a pretty good president, but I think he gave too much. It was too lenient towards the Soviet Union in this. He, you know, of course, pushed for this peaceful coexistence. He did have a push in Southeast Asia and the domino theory. The domino theory is that if we could knock this country over, then this one will fall, this one will fall, this one, and so forth. So this idea of a domino theory stopping, or in essence, also can work against us. If, you know, if the Russians are able to secure this country as communist, and this country will turn communist, and so forth and so on. But also from the same vein, if we can keep this country from becoming communist, and so the whole idea of how this domino thing works. Of course, also at the same time, we end up with Cuba. The Cuban Missile Crisis, of course, comes about under Kennedy, which is later, but Cuba becomes communism. It's a favorite place for, you know, of course, Russian sailors to travel to is to Cuba, and sometimes they put their warships, used to put their warships in there. Also, we have domestic reform, Truman and the Fair Deal, government intervention to bring about full employment. Of course, Truman did not learn much from FDR and what FDR had to say. You have also the Red Scare and Senator Joseph McCarthy, which he is, of course, lambasted as this paranoid guy, and we call anybody who goes against communism as this McCarthyism. Anytime we're trying to weed out communism or people we don't agree with, we call it a McCarthyism. And unfortunately, he was really the Russian influence in what was going on. He was correct, and history is starting to show more and more that actually McCarthy, Senator Joseph McCarthy, was right of what was going on in Hollywood and other places in the United States. In fact, if you go back and you look at many of after the Soviet Union fell in the 1990s, a lot of documentation became available. And a lot of the revolution that happened here in the United States during the 1960s was funded by the Soviet Union and orchestrated by a number of their agents here in the United States. So the Red Scare is something that is actually happened. You know, they're talking, we're reliving it again now. The claim by the Democrats is Russians' involvement in this last election. They helped Trump win, therefore Trump shouldn't be president. We should impeach him because of all this. Well, the Soviet Union has been involved in trying to influence things in the United States for a long, long time, as have we. Great movie to watch about some of the things going on in East Germany, West Germany, and Russian and the Soviet Union. Watch the movie Bridge of Spies with Tom Hanks. Great, great movie. Of course, some of it was done dramatically, but the basis, the historical fact of what actually happened is true. And but a really good movie of some of the things going on during this time. You have continued, of course, domestic reform under Eisenhower, what he called dynamic conservatism. Again, things are not new. George W. Bush came out with compassionate conservatism. If you look at dynamic conservatism, it's the same thing as what George W. Bush called compassionate conservatism. conservative on money and liberal with people. That's basically what George W. Bush did. What is it? The education reform. No Child Left Behind. I always want to think of the No Child Left a Dime is what the tagline by some of the opposition was for it. And then you had, of course, the welfare reform that he did, Medicare Part B, which is I think it's Medicare Part B, which is the drug plan. He basically increased the Medicare program, doubled it, because of some of the things that he wanted to do. And some economists would say the reason why our drugs are costing so much is because of some of the Medicare changes that George W. put in. Kennedy, the New Frontier, the Peace Corps, Alliance for Progress to combat communism in Latin America, and of course the big one, the Bay of Pigs. I'm actually a huge fan of Kennedy. Kennedy was a Democrat in the tradition of the Democratic Party. He was for the small guy, but a lot of people forget Ronald Reagan, during the time of Kennedy, was a Democrat. Ronald Reagan became a Republican after Lyndon Johnson took over and started moving the country over towards the Great Society. So Kennedy actually spoke of tax cuts to spur on economic growth. He talked about a lot of these different things that would help move the country forward that we would say, well, that's Reaganomics. No, it was Kennedy had the idea first. So let's give credit to credit's due. Of course, if you bring that up to a Democrat, they will say you're lying. But if you listen to the actual speeches that Kennedy gave, you can see where he actually said these things.
Mr. Sharkey?
Yes?
An interesting thing is that part of the reason that, like, when Kennedy was shot, he was unable to defend himself because he was not able to, like, cover his head because of a war injury from World War II.
Yeah, he was injured during World War II. He was actually a war hero. His older brother actually died in the war, and I'm not sure if Robert served. I'm not as familiar with Robert as John, but there's a movie that was done a number of years ago called PT-109. It basically talks about that's John F. Kennedy's. He actually was the captain on a torpedo boat, and his torpedo boat was sunk, and him and his guys were left on an island, and that's where I think he got his injury, was through that. But I don't know if it would have mattered if he'd have been able to protect himself, even if he put his hands up. Of course, there's a lot of different people who say that he was shot from the front, not from the back. There are other people who say he was shot from the back. There's a lot of conspiracies over JFK's. Watch the movie JFK. That's got an interesting. There's another one out there called the Killing Kennedy one. It's based off of Bill O'Reilly's book. I did get to hear. Anybody know who Woody Harrelson is?
Yes.
Now You See Me. He played one of the guys on Now You See Me. He also played in Hunger Games.
Yep.
He was one of the guys. I don't know if he did in the movie.
No.
No, Woody Harrelson. His dad, Woody Harrelson's dad, was actually a hitman for the mob. So Woody Harrelson's dad, see, there's many conspiracies that believe that the actually was the mob that killed Kennedy in collusion with JFK, or not JFK, with Johnson and the FBI. There is an actual photograph of the knoll there on the roadway. And in the picture is Woody Harrelson's dad. Yes. So there's a lot of conspiracies out there, and you can see why. There's a lot of things that, like, wait, that's interesting. Wait, that's interesting. So whether Kennedy was actually killed the way they say, or whether it was something more, maybe we'll know in a few years. It's supposed to. The Warren commission's findings are supposed to come out soon, but we'll see.
And then like, what was it? The speech that Kennedy gave right before he was assassinated. It's like, if you watch that, it's like, whoa, that guy coming against all the swamp, so to speak. And then he got killed. And then the killer was shot, so you can never talk to the killer.
Correct. The emergence of minority rights. Another one of my heroes during this time would be, of course, Martin Luther King Jr. His idea of non-aggression and basically peaceful protest. Then, of course, Jackie Robinson. If you like baseball and you like a great movie, 41.
Is it 41 or 42?
Is it 42?
40, I thought it was 42.
42, maybe it's 42. Maybe it might be 42, I can never remember. But the Jackie Robinson movie, excellent, excellent movie. Because it goes to show you that it's not,
42.
is it 42?
Yeah.
Thank you. Again, you watch that movie and the portrayal of Jackie Robinson in that movie is tremendous. Okay, cool. The portrayal of Jackie in that movie is astounding. And then Harrison Ford's portrayal of the manager, of the general manager of the team, and his going out on a limb to have Jackie Robinson play, and the things that these guys went through. You got to see it. I would highly recommend watching that. Just a tremendously done movie. And you can see that I think it's one of the greatest portrayals of showing that the civil rights movement was not was not just a black movement, but there were some key black figures in it that behind them were some amazing white people as well. And I think that sometimes what's lost in this is that this was not just a black movement. This was a movement of people who didn't like the way this was being done. And the Jackie Robinson movie, I think, portrays it the most. And of course, you have Martin Luther King Jr. and his March on Washington, and I Had a Dream speech. I haven't seen it yet, but of course, Selma portrays him crossing the bridge in Selma, Alabama, if I remember that right. Like I said, I haven't seen it. I'm not as familiar with that episode either. But again, another great guy. Okay, that's all I have. So we should be back up to speed now. Okay. Yes.
Mr. Sharkey, I know it's spring break next.
Yes.
But what about the week after? I still haven't seen it.
I think we do. Yes. Everything that's due next week will go out this week, so you guys will have, or everything that's due in 2 weeks.
But don't we already have that on our syllabus?
Yes, but I think there's like a test.
Yeah.
So I need to send you the test,
Okay.
which I will do, maybe, if you're nice. Or if I'm feeling mean, I guess.
So the spring ball Saturday?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I just got dressed up and
Yeah, because I'll be at the
I got dressed up for no reason.
Not coming out of the house, and I was like, I'm not letting him drive my car. He's not gonna get out of this house. Driving my car with no gas. So I took my keys, right, and I left them in his car. Everyone just sent that, so now I get a tweet the other day. Every time I started to get my call.
Yeah.
With this girl for
get my thing going.
I ended up finding this. And
Alex.
What?
Alex.
I didn't find that out before I started talking to her. Or I didn't find that out off after I started talking to her. I knew that before.
You're stupid. We're all disappointed in you.
And then I found out that he's in the military, and then I felt even more bad.
Alex, you're so mean. What is your problem?
He's mean.
Yeah.
Like the home button is like so sensitive. It's actually better. I don't like the 6 fucking. I
Yeah.
don't like pressing it in.
7 when we just touch it. George report. Kim will use you.
What? Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.